Okay, let's play a quick word association game. If I say corporate strategy, what is the very first image that pops into your head? Be honest.
Oh, honestly. Um, a windowless conference room, a plate of stale pastries, and a very expensive, very thick binder that everyone pretends to read.
But eventually just uses as a monitor stand.
Exactly. That's the one.
That is the exact image I had. It feels like this bureaucratic ritual, right?
Yeah,
You do it because you have to, not because it actually changes anything.
right. But we have a stack of research here today specifically focused on the evolution of strategy that argues we are looking at this completely wrong.
How so?
Well, if you think strategy is just about binders or buzzwords, you are missing, like, the single most important story in business history. Because strategy isn't just paperwork, it is the history of how human beings try to control an uncontrollable future.
That is a big claim. Controlling the future. I mean, it sounds almost mythological.
It's true, though. The deep dive today is going to trace that entire arc. We're going to go from the early days, you know, guys in gray flannel suits thinking they could literally engineer success, all the way to right now.
And right now is
Right.
different.
It's a shift that's honestly a little terrifying.
Yeah.
We are moving from strategy as a conceptual discipline to strategy as a computational science.
So from human brains to artificial ones.
Exactly. We're moving from the boardroom to the black box.
Okay, I definitely want to get to the sci-fi stuff because the idea of an algorithm running a company is wild, but we need to understand how we got here.
For sure.
The research identifies these distinct schools of strategy. It starts in what they call the classical era, and this feels very orderly.
It was incredibly orderly. Think about the post-World War II era. Business was booming, hierarchies were rigid, and this gave birth to the design school.
The design school. It sounds like an art class, but I'm guessing we're not talking about logos.
No, not graphic
Yeah.
design. It was about structural design. The core idea here was fit. You've probably heard of a SWOT analysis.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Yeah, I think I did one in a high school project.
That is the design school in a nutshell. The CEO was seen as the solitary architect. You look at your internal strengths, you look at the external threats, and you design a strategy that fits them together like a puzzle piece.
It's very deliberate, very simple.
Very. The CEO thinks the organization acts. End of story.
But that sounds fine. Shouldn't you look at your strengths and weaknesses? Why do we move away from that?
Because companies just got too big for one person's brain. I mean, General Motors in the 1960s couldn't be run by one architect just thinking hard. They needed a system.
Ah,
And that ushered in the planning school.
and this is the era of the binders you mentioned earlier.
This is peak binder era. The engineers took over. The belief was that strategy could be broken down into this formal step-by-step process.
Okay.
You forecast the demand, you budget the resources, you schedule the execution. It was the birth of the 5-year plan.
I feel like 5-year plan has become a punchline. But at the time, they really believed they could predict, say, 1975 back in 1970.
They absolutely did. They treated business like a machine. If you just calibrated the gears correctly, budgeting, forecasting, scheduling, the output was guaranteed. Companies built these massive strategic planning departments.
So why did it fail? Why don't we still do that?
Because the world refused to cooperate.
Yeah.
The planning school assumed that if you had enough data, you could predict the future. But then the 1970s hit.
Right.
Oil shocks, inflation, massive disruption. The plans all said growth, but the reality said crisis. You can't schedule innovation, and you certainly can't schedule a global recession.
So the binders were useless because the world changed faster than the ink could dry.
Pretty much. It was
Yeah.
paralysis by analysis, but the academics, they didn't give up on being rational just yet. So in the 80s, we got the positioning school,
Okay.
and this was huge. This is where Michael Porter enters the chat.
I know that name. He's the competitive advantage guy.
Right. So the positioning school stopped looking internally at planning processes and started looking at the industry structure. Think of it less like a machine and more like a military map.
How do you mean?
Well, the strategy wasn't just let's work harder. It was let's find a hill that is easy to defend. They used analytical tools to find a spot in the market where profit was protected. Maybe high barriers to entry or a monopoly on a resource.
So you dig a moat, you build a castle, and you just stay there.
Exactly. I will occupy this market segment and no one can touch me.
That sounds very logical, very calculated.
It is. But here is the flaw in all three of these classical schools: design, planning, positioning.
What's that?
They all assume that companies are rational actors. They assume the CEO pulls a lever and the machine just obeys.
And anyone who has ever worked in an office knows that is not how it works. People are weird.
People are incredibly weird, humans are messy, they're emotional, and they're political. And the history of strategy had to pivot to deal with that.
This is the part of the research that I found really validating. It's called the human element.
Right.
It basically admits that the spreadsheet is useless if the people ignoring it are all doing their own thing.
It's the revenge of the humanities, really. First up, you had the entrepreneurial school. And this just flipped the script entirely. It said strategy isn't a process, it's a vision.
So this is the Steve Jobs archetype, the lone genius.
Precisely. The great leader. It's intuition over analysis. The entrepreneurial school says you can't analyze your way to the iPhone.
Right.
You have to have a gut feeling, a bold bet on an uncertain future. It's not about the binder. It's about the founder's instinct.
But that's so dangerous, isn't it? I mean, if your gut is wrong, you crash the company. We only ever hear about the ones who are right.
Oh, it is incredibly high risk. It's high-stakes gambling. And that brings us to the cognitive school. This is where psychology just kicks the door down.
Cognitive. Okay, so we're talking about how we think.
Yes. This school argues that strategy is really just a fancy word for how executives perceive the world. And the problem is, executives often perceive the world incorrectly.
Incorrectly how? Like they don't see the numbers on the page.
No, they see the numbers, but their brains warp them. We're talking about cognitive biases. You know, confirmation bias, you only see the data that proves you're right.
Yeah.
Or optimism bias, you assume the project will be cheaper and faster than it ever really is. The cognitive school basically says, you think you are analyzing the market objectively, but you're actually just filtering data to support what you already wanted to do anyway.
That explains so many bad corporate mergers. Two CEOs convinced it's a match made in heaven, just ignoring every single red flag.
It explains almost everything. But it gets even messier. Because humans aren't just biased, we are power hungry. Enter the power school.
This sounds like an episode of Succession.
It's not far off.
Yeah.
The power school views strategy as a process of negotiation. It argues that the best plan rarely wins. The plan that wins is the one backed by the strongest coalition in the room.
So the strategy isn't, we should enter the Asian market because the data supports it. It's more like we are entering the Asian market because the VP of sales needs a win for his promotion and he made a deal with the VP of operations.
That's it, exactly. It completely dismantles the idea that strategy is rational, it's political, and closely tied to that is the cultural school.
Okay.
This suggests that strategy is limited by who we are.
Can you give me an example of that? How does culture limit a strategy?
Sure. Imagine a really conservative old-school bank trying to launch a hip, digital-only crypto startup. The strategy might look great on paper, but the culture, the shared beliefs, the risk aversion, the way they talk to each other, that will eat that strategy for breakfast.
So you can't act against your own nature.
Pretty much.
So we've gone from strategy as a perfect plan to strategy as this messy mix of psychology, politics, and culture. That feels a little hopeless. If we can't plan, and we can't trust our brains because we're biased and office politics ruin everything, then what do we do?
You stop trying to control everything up front. This is the major pivot to adaptation. The research points to the learning school.
Learning sounds a bit soft. What does it mean in a cutthroat business context?
It means emergent strategy. So instead of sitting in a room and planning the next 5 years, you take small steps, you experiment, you try things, you see what works, and then you double down on that.
So you don't figure it out first, you figure it out as you go.
It's evolution, really. You let the market teach you what your strategy should be. You launch the product before it's perfect just to see if anyone cares. If they do, you build more. If they don't, you kill it.
That feels very modern. Fail fast.
It is, and it pairs with the environmental school, which is basically a slice of humble pie for CEOs. It says, you aren't really in charge.
Uh-oh.
The economy, the ecology, a pandemic, these external forces dictate your survival. You are just a species trying to adapt to an ecosystem.
That feels very relevant to the last few years. I mean, companies that had rigid 5-year plans in 2019 probably didn't have a great 2020.
Not at all.
The ones that survived were the ones that could pivot.
Exactly. The ones that survived were the ones that could learn and adapt instantly.
Okay, so we have the history, rational planning, then messy human reality, then adaptation. But the source material says we are entering a totally new era.
Yes.
And this is where the tone of the research shifts. It's called the algorithmic score.
This is the paradigm shift. Everything we just talked about, whether it was binders or intuition, had one thing in common: humans were doing the thinking.
Now,
Now, data is replacing intuition as the raw material. And we are not talking about looking at a spreadsheet. We are talking about computational intelligence.
help me understand the difference. I mean, companies have always used data. Walmart was using data back in the 80s to track inventory.
True, but they used data to support a human decision. A human looked at the report and said, I think we should stock more umbrellas.
Right.
In the algorithmic school, the machine detects the pattern and makes the decision before the human even knows it's raining.
Can you give me a concrete example? What does this look like in the wild?
Look at dynamic pricing. If you book an airline ticket or an Uber, that price changes second by second. No human is sitting there adjusting those dials. An algorithm is processing supply, demand, weather, competitor prices, historical trends,
All at once.
all at once to set a strategy for that specific transaction. Now, just imagine that logic applied to everything a company does.
The source mentions this concept of digital twins. That sounds fascinating, like something straight out of science fiction. What is a digital twin?
It's a simulation. Imagine you could build a complete replica of your entire company, your supply chain, your factories, your workforce, your customer demand, all of it, entirely in code.
Like a video game version of the corporation.
Yes, and because it's digital, you can run experiments on it, risk-free. You can ask, what happens if a hurricane hits our factory in Florida? Or, what happens if the price of steel goes up by 20%?
And you can run that simulation how many times?
10,000 times in an hour. You can see the results without risking a single dollar in the real world. It just changes the game.
That is wild.
In the old planning school, you had one plan. You bet the farm on plan A. In the algorithmic school, you can test 10,000 futures to find the one that has the highest probability of success.
That word you just used, probability, that's a shift too, isn't it?
It's a massive psychological shift. Leaders used to be declarative. We will win this market. Now, strategy is becoming probabilistic. The model suggests an 82% chance of success if we take this path.
It sounds smarter, but it also sounds, I don't know, colder. If the algorithm says, close the factory to optimize margin, does the CEO just do it?
And you just hit on the biggest tension in this new era. It's the black box problem. Deep learning models can find patterns that humans can't see, but they often can't explain why they found them.
Right. It's just the computer says so.
Exactly. And that creates a terrifying fragility. If you rely entirely on the model, what happens when the model is wrong? Or when the data is bad?
Garbage in, garbage out.
The classic phrase. If your data has a blind spot, your strategy has a blind spot.
And since the humans aren't checking the math anymore because it's just too complex, you might not realize you're driving off a cliff until you're already in midair.
That is the risk. We are trading understanding for efficiency. We might be making better decisions, but we understand why we are making them less and less.
This has to change the job description of a CEO or a strategist. You can't just be a people person or a visionary anymore.
No. The source uses this great phrase. Leaders are moving from being decision makers to decision architects.
Decision architect. Okay, that sounds fancy. Unpack that for me.
It means your job isn't to make the call on whether to launch the product. Your job is to design the machine that makes that call. You are building the intelligence engine.
So you need to understand data science.
You need to understand data science and systems engineering just as much as you understand marketing or finance.
So the modern strategist is part philosopher, part coder.
And part synthesizer. Because if you just optimize for the algorithm, you might destroy the other parts of the business that machines can't measure.
Like culture.
Exactly. Remember the cultural school. If the AI tells you to do something that violates your company's core identity, say cutting customer service to save money when your brand is built on service, you might win on the spreadsheet, but lose in the real world.
So we're layering these schools, not replacing them.
That is the key insight. The old schools didn't die. We still need vision from the entrepreneurial school to tell the AI what to optimize for. We still need power and politics to get people to actually use the tools. The modern strategist has to juggle all of these layers at once.
It's overwhelming. You need the vision of Steve Jobs, the political savvy of a diplomat, and the technical brain of a data scientist.
It is a high bar, but the companies that get it right are pulling away from the pack. The speed is just different. Strategy cycles used to be annual. You'd go to an offsite in October to plan for next year. Now, it's a continuous real-time loop.
The strategy updates every time the data updates.
Every single time.
So looking at this whole timeline, We started with a desire for control. We tried to get it through binders. Then we realized we couldn't control the people. Now we are trying to get a control back through algorithms.
That's a really poetic way to put it. We are constantly building new tools to tame the uncertainty of the future.
There was one final thought in the research that really stuck with me. It was about competitive advantage in the future.
Yes. This is the thought to leave the listener with.
It said, in the past, advantage went to those who planned better. In the future, advantage will belong to those who learn faster than their own models.
Learn faster than their own models.
What does that even mean? How do you learn faster than a supercomputer?
I think it means that models are always based on past data. They are backward-looking by definition. They predict what will happen based on what has happened.
Okay.
The human edge is the ability to imagine something that has never happened before, to break the model.
So the AI can predict the probable future, but only a human can invent an impossible one.
Exactly. The binder is gone, the algorithm is here, but the imagination, that's still on us.
That is a weirdly hopeful place to end. Strategy is dead. Long live strategy.
It's certainly not getting any easier, but it's definitely getting more interesting.
Thank you for walking us through this journey. It definitely makes those corporate buzzwords sound a little more substantial.
My pleasure.
And to you listening, think about your own strategy. Are you following a binder or are you building an engine? We'll see you in the next deep dive.